kids. This is Learning to Dad.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
With Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm going to have fun, and you're going to have fun.
Hello and welcome to Learning to Dad. I'm Tyler Ross. My guest today is Marc Hodulich. I'm so happy to have you here. Thanks a lot for giving me your time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tyler.
Yeah, well, I don't know a whole lot about you. I've done a bunch of research online. I found, of course, been on your Instagram page. I know you got a couple boys, but the way I want to start is what I think is what you're doing now professionally with 29029. Is that what you call it? 29029 or 29,029?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. 29029. Yeah, that's an endurance challenge that I created with Jesse Itzler, who I know you had on the show as well.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the first partnership that we have. We do many businesses together now, but that's kind of where it all started, which is really just a pretty amazing weekend that combines part vacation, part challenge, part self-discovery, and networking all in one. And the networking, honestly, was like the least of my focus with the event. But I think when you bring a lot of really like-minded people together and they bond through a really hard challenge, you know, it's a you versus you challenge. It's how many times can you hike up the mountain, take the gondola down and repeat, with the ultimate goal being in 36 hours to climb 29,029 feet, which is the height of Everest. So, you know, when you're hiking with people, sharing meals together, sharing a tent with them, you obviously bond. So I think it's bonding much more than it is networking. That's kind of the event in a nutshell.
Yeah, I actually had just seen the event, and I told my wife I kind of want to do this, and then immediately I got an ad on Instagram that said 4 spots left, and by the time I exhaled, you guys had sold out.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, I know people, so we'll see what we can do there. We'll see what we can do. But yeah, you know, it's we limit them to 250 people,
yeah.
And are proud that both of them have already sold out for this year. One's in August and one's in October. But part of that, keeping it small, is really that focus on community, and over 3 days getting to meet everyone. And it's one of those things where a lot of people do hesitate about signing up for something so big. It takes the average person 27 or 28 hours to finish.
Yeah.
It's a long time to hike. But, you know, as you get older, I'm not sure how old you are. I'm 38, about to turn 39. As you get older, you tend to do less things where you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You tend to stay in your lane and stick to things that you're good at.
Yeah.
And, you know, nothing out there like this exists. When was the last time you shared a bedroom or a tent with a stranger? You know, it's probably when you were at camp. When you were
first day of college, you know? Yeah.
Or first day of college, right? So it's either at camp or in college. And the same thing with, you know, how is your body going to hold up? How are you going to feel mentally and physically doing a challenge like this? And it's not meant for elite athletes at all. And we really don't get many elite athletes because we don't have awards. You know, it's self-scored by branding a wall with your name on it. You know, you take a cattle brand and kind of burn in and sear in each summit that you do. So it's a very different approach, but it's one where you kind of have to say yes first and then figure it out later, which tends to work pretty well sometimes in life.
Yeah, I've heard that mantra from Jesse himself. You know, get your foot in the door, figure out the rest later. So tell me, tell me the origin story of 29029.
Yeah,
it seems like your history, you've got a lot of, funtertainment, if I want to coin a phrase, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of things start off with the basis of kind of a question in your own head, right? And for me, the question in my head was I was running 12 to 15 miles, not daily, but like a long run once a week. And I would run it on the trails, and my friends who were also runners, would run theirs on the road. And I would just say, well, I climbed X amount of vertical feet. And they would say, well, who the hell cares? And I started thinking, well, how hard would it be to climb 10,000 vertical feet, 15, 20? And at the same time, I was coaching my son, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about today, in flag football. And Jesse's son, his oldest son, was on the team. And we just struck up a conversation in a mutual kind of shared interest in endurance events and personal challenges. And I had an event production company. He was like, I always wanted my own event. I was like, look, I got this kind of crazy idea about how many vertical feet you could get. And then Jesse, the marketing genius, was like, can you get Everest? What if we did an event around Everest? And you know, I think there's a lot of times where an idea is thrown out, but it was one that I felt like was strong enough to like, look, we can build a whole brand around this. And finding out how long it was going to take by going and testing it with a former college track teammate of mine, Matt Burrell, a very close friend of mine, my best friend, Jesse and Jesse's trainer, we realized like this is going to take longer than an Ironman takes. This is going to take sleeping. And then that's where kind of the whole camping and community share experience came to be. So, very long-winded way of saying that it came from almost a little bit of like, is this possible? How long would it take to saying, wow, in trying this, I learned a lot about myself. It's a lot of time. And that time is not one that's scary, right? It's not like you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's like you're just repeating something again and again. But it actually becomes harder because when I did Leadville, which is a 100-mile run, I'd never wanted to quit. But if you do want to quit, it's kind of pretty hard because you're in the middle of the Rockies. You may be 7 to 10 miles from an aid station. Even if you're quitting, you still got to walk it somewhere. They're not going to send a helicopter to come get you. Whereas in 29 or 29, you're at the bottom of a beautiful resort. Every lap, you can just decide to go inside and get farm to table food, to get a massage. All the amenities that we provide are great, but they're also all temptations, and you got to choose to kind of climb up the hill the next time or up the mountain the next time. So it's been very well thought out and scripted in a way where it provides the right amount of challenge and really allows you to kind of learn about yourself by really digging deep and finding out what's beneath the surface and what makes you tick.
Yeah, that's amazing. I wonder if about the first time you tried it, was it just something you had the conversation, we're going to try to get 29,000 feet, and then you just went and did it and said, yes, people can do this?
Yeah, there was a little planning involved. We realized that the downhill was going to take a real toll on us, and that we needed to have a method to get down. And, in Georgia, we don't really have ski resorts, and we didn't want to have to fly somewhere to test this. So it was having a friend of ours drive a Suburban, and also it was a decent amount of challenge to find out, I'm going to sound geeky saying this, but we had to be efficient in terms of vertical feet gain. So you wanted to find something steep without a lot of flat because, you don't want to have to cover 50 or 75 miles to cover 29,000 feet. So you want to find something decently steep. So I talked to a lot of trail runners. I talked to a lot of hikers, looked at stuff on the Appalachian Trail, was trying to find something in North Georgia and found a trail called Jack's Gap, which is like 2,400 feet of gain over a little over 2 miles, which is steep.
Yeah.
And luckily enough, has a road running next to it. So we were able to hike up and have a buddy that sat there for an hour and would drive us down and repeat it. And you pretty quickly realize like, oh, geez, each hike is taking us 45 minutes. And you do the math, you're like, well, we're going to be out here a long time. So we were prepared with hydration and food and caffeine and everything that we needed being endurance athletes. But it wasn't really into the realization of like, you do kind of lap 5, and you realize, oh my God, like to finish this thing, we're going to be out here another 12 or 15 hours. That's where it starts to weigh on you when you've been out doing something for 5, 6, 7 hours. You can't let the enormity of what is left overtake where you're at. And you just kind of have to stay present and stay in the moment for each lap. So even testing the event was a really big challenge for us. And we realized we were onto something, and also realized the right format, location, support was really going to be necessary to make sure that people could accomplish this.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I'm 35 and I'm finding myself becoming more interested in endurance events. And if I recall right, I read an article about you running track at Auburn at the collegiate level, but you are not an endurance guy, right? Like,
no,
what was the shift towards endurance? Did you find it came with age?
Yeah. Look, I ran at Auburn. I wasn't really good, to put it in perspective, right? When you're lining up against Olympic athletes and looking down the line and kind of already having lost the race before it started. And I think a lot of people that run in college go one in two ways after college. They have these unrealistic dreams for most of us of winning road races and making some type of career out of running, which there's not much of a career there. And the few that do it, it's a really hard life. Or you give it up altogether and start lifting weights because you've been 120 pounds and you're tired of being the small guy. And I kind of did the latter. I stayed in really good shape, but I didn't really run a lot other than a couple miles a day. And the draw to my first Ironman came from my best friend that I mentioned before, Matt Burrell, did Ironman Florida in 2016. And I'd never run a marathon. I'd run 18 and 20 mile runs, but I'd never even done a half marathon competitively. I was a short distance guy at the end of the middle distance. I was an 800 meter runner and a miler. And so it was just nothing that was on my radar. I wasn't interested in running a fast marathon, qualifying for Boston. I had plenty of teammates that did it. It just wasn't something that really I was curious about. And my oldest son was 6 at the time, about to turn 7. And we went down and cheered Matt on with my youngest and my wife. And he looked at me and was like, well, Dad, you can do an Ironman, right? And I was like, sure, I can do an Ironman. And about a week later, signed up for Ironman Mont Tremblant, which was going to be 8 months later. And I never run a marathon. I didn't own a bike. I couldn't swim 50 yards across the pool. It was just like, okay, this is going to be my next thing. This is going to be something that I really dig in. And that was my entree into endurance sport. It wasn't like for years I plotted out what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. It was literally like, I have 8 months to figure this out. And, you know, I'm not necessarily a gifted athlete in the realm of endurance sport, but I've been running a lot in my life. Mm-hmm. And certainly the marathon for people is daunting at the end of an Ironman. It was almost something that I look forward to in the sense that I'm a runner. The one thing I know I can do is run. Yeah. So it was like, if I can survive the swim, if I cannot have any mishaps on the bike, I know the run's going to go well. Not being arrogant, but it's been something I've been doing my whole life.
Sure.
So that was the start. And, you know, that was my first marathon, was in the Ironman. I've done a few since, but more as training runs or a little bit more off the wall. A close friend of mine runs a charity, the Kyle Peace Foundation, and you push disabled athletes.
Oh, wow.
And so I did the Marine Corps Marathon and pushed an athlete named Dontavius Ridley. And, you know, going a little less than 4 hours and providing, you know, an opportunity for someone else to run a marathon like Dontavius was equally, if not more rewarding than doing my own Ironman. So, you know, that was kind of my entree into that. And then kind of after doing that, I was like, well, what's next? And that kind of became the 100-miler, which I'm not sure what's after this. I think my wife's scared about that, but I'm still starting to just scratch the surface of really what endurance sport is about for me, at least.
Yeah, so that's probably revealing a lot of qualities in and of yourself, a lot of self-exploration. Is there anything that you've really learned about yourself on a human level that, you know, has been exposed through doing these things that you had never really been conditioned to do?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot. I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I certainly realized that through the training, I have incredible levels of discipline that I think I've probably taken for granted for a while, just because I lived a mostly healthy lifestyle, or I didn't drink too much, or I didn't eat bad foods that much. But that when I focused on training, everything else in my life had to be optimized around that. So I had to get the proper sleep. I want to see my kids and play with them on a minimum once a day. It was a very important thing to me. So it was like, I have to get up earlier. You know, I don't like the morning. Yeah. And so I just realized, like, I'm not a morning person. I still hate the morning, but if I need to be in the pool and I, you know, an entrepreneur and run businesses with Jesse, I have a lot of work to do. Like, I got to be in the pool by 5 a.m. And like, I didn't even like getting up until 6:30, but I realized that like, I had a lot of discipline and I was going to be committed to something. And then, you know, I've always felt like I was decently tough. I mean, in high school, I ran on a broken foot for 4 months, which ended up having really catastrophic results in this year of running. But I felt like I had a pretty high pain tolerance. I was able to do things. I don't know that I learned that I had that high of a pain tolerance going through this process, but I realized that quit is not something I'm willing to do. So I did last year in 2018, I did a 50K, then I did a 50 miler, and then I did the 100. Wow. And the 50K was significantly harder for me than the 100. The 100, I had a good day, and the 50 had a bad day. Yeah. And, you know, as I was laying on the ground, completely dehydrated, my body in full cramps and spasms, I went from being in the top 10 of the race, and there were only 100 something people in the race, but having 30 or 40 people pass me with 2.5 miles left, and I'm crawling on my hands and knees and shaking, and all I thought about was, oh, I still have 5 hours before the time cut off. You know, there was never the thought of I'm not going to finish. It was just being frustrated. I'd let myself get dehydrated, that I'd skipped an aid station because I started thinking about a top 10 finish. I got distracted from my goal, so I was mad about that. But what I learned about myself was that there's no quit, and that the finish line and the joy of finishing was going to far outweigh anything that I had been through, and that I wasn't going to give up on myself mainly. So I don't know if this is my own quote, if I've read it from somewhere, so I always want to make sure I preface it. But, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about is that, you know, your mind's going to constantly open the door to quitting, and are you going to let your body walk through that door, right? And I just realized that day, like, no matter what happens, I'm not going to let myself walk through that door. And don't get me wrong, it's not to say like in the 100, there weren't numerous times that I thought about, oh, it'd be so good if I was laying in bed or if I wasn't doing this right now. But you have to quickly change your mindset to just be the next mile, see the next family member, whatever it is, to keep going. So I certainly learned a lot through it. And then I learned a lot about my family. I learned how much having a big goal like this impacts everyone around you, and that maybe I didn't put into context enough, like how big a goal 100 miles is. and seeing other people's reactions still to this day, that you did it at one of the hardest ones, in Leadville, Colorado at 10,000 feet, climbing mountains along the way. I didn't really put that in perspective through my training. I was just so focused on the goal and kind of seeing the unconditional support and love from my parents and my sister and my wife and my kids. That's had a big impact as well, that I didn't realize how much me doing something like that was impacting others too.
Yeah, how much of that quit, that willingness to not walk through that door and to not quit is, passed down from your parents, and how much of it is some sort of practice that you've put into effect with intention, and how much of it you think is just, that's the way you are, that's the way you're wired?
I'd say it's 50-50, right? Yeah. And so you named 3 ways.
Yeah.
I would say I think half of it comes from the way I've seen my dad work. My grandfather, was a longshoreman. He owned a bar in New Jersey. And so I was saying, I believe half of it is kind of seeing those traits and seeing that toughness and it being instilled in you at a young age. You kind of learn to respect it and truly understanding what hard work is, whether that was doing yard work in the yard when I didn't want to. I mean, my dad could have afforded to have a landscaper come, but yet it was something I had to do on weekends to kind of earn an allowance. And so it was kind of ingrained from an early age, I think, having seen that from my parents and my grandparents. But then I believe, running track in college, waking up early in the morning to work out, staying late at work, whatever it may be, the more you do things that kind of suck and are a little bit hard, I do think you harden your mind. So I believe it's a little bit half kind of who you are when you're born and who's around you. You absorb that. I see my kids absorbing it right now. My 9-year-old, unbeknownst to me, without even asking, wrote down in a journal that he has, he wanted to run 103 miles this year because my race was 103 miles. Yeah. So that's his goal for the year. Now he's going to hit that by midsummer. But, last year he probably only ran 10 miles in a whole year. He ran 3 5Ks. So I think some of it you absorb kind of from who you're around, and then you put it into practice yourself. And so that kind of won't quit mentality, I think, is something you can both learn and absorb from people you're around, and then you can teach it to yourself. I truly believe that.
So how old's your other? Do you have a 9-year-old, and how old's your other one?
Yeah, so Chase is my 9-year-old and Dylan's my 7-year-old. So 2 boys.
So, and they watch you train. They watch you get up early, and you think that example is just being soaked into them already?
Yeah, kids soak up everything around them. The good and the bad, as being a dad, you got to watch what you say. Your kids will repeat it. At about 2 years old, they start to pick up on some of that stuff. Yeah. So in our household, it's sense of humor. I'm a big goofball. I'm a jokester and a prankster, and I'm always trying to scare them or pull pranks on them. But then the hard stuff that you do wears off too. Yeah. And I think involving them in the process is big. So my 7-year-old will probably be a much better runner than I was, will probably be better than my 9-year-old is. He has no desire right now, so he'll push it. But when I would go for a long run of 17 to 20 miles on the weekend, I would want them to join me for the last mile or two. And, I made Chase my oldest part of that process because he wanted to. My 7-year-old Dylan wasn't as interested in it, but maybe I could get him to ride the bike with me, and they would see how tired I was, and even this morning, I ran 11 miles this morning. And I know Chase is going to want to run tonight to hit his goal. We try to run on Mondays and Thursdays. So when I get home from work tonight, the first thing we'll do is go run 2 miles together. And that's me kind of showing that I'm supporting his goal. And he knows this morning, before he went to school, I'd come in and I looked like a wreck. It was hot and humid this morning. And I'd already run, my 11 miles and, before I took them to school. So I do think they see that. They recognize it, and then them having their own goal is not something I even pushed on them. And I think once they have that, they kind of recognize like, oh geez, like I have to consistently do this to see it come to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah. So how old were your kids when they started like really participating in, watching you trying to reach your goals?
Well, I didn't have these big athletic goals until 17, right?
Yeah.
So in 2017, so it's been, they were 7 and 5. Mm-hmm. It's not that they weren't going to the gym with me when I worked out, because they did. They've always, my kids are with me a lot, and I try to expose them to as many things as I can. But I think that the first time kind of seeing something as big as Ironman and then 100-miler, that's been back-to-back years. So it's been pretty full on for them the last couple of years for sure.
Cool. So 99, 2000, you had your first kid, Chase. And what were you doing professionally at that time?
So that was 2009. Yeah, 2009.
2009. Goodness.
No, you're good. No, I was still in college. I hope I didn't have any kids in 99. At the time I was a management consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a management consultant, strategy consultant, and I had a charity event that I created for Wall Street executives on the side.
So you were living in New York at the time?
I was living in Manhattan at the time, yeah.
Okay.
So I've always tried to involve them in what I did. So from the time that they were kind of able to, at 3 years old, they gave away the medals at the end of my charity event. It was involving them and kind of what I was doing and letting them see, even if it wasn't my full-time job, it was some high side hustle, was wanting to involve them as much as possible.
Yeah. So what that being your side hustle, what your main job was on Wall Street in Manhattan? Like, how did you had your kids in the city, or at least your first kid in the city? How'd that?
Yeah, we had both kids in the city. I didn't work on Wall Street, but I was a management consultant. So, we had some Wall Street clients, but I was lucky enough to work for a firm that had really good work-life balance. And although I was working 60 or 70 hours a week, I was able to work from home when I wanted to. Most of my clients were in the city, so I didn't have to do too much travel. But your priorities shift a lot, right? Living in Manhattan, there's a happy hour every night of the week. There's always someone going out. It was very easy on my way home from work to go out with friends and do things. Now I was trying to hustle to make sure I got to spend time with my kids before they went to an early bedtime. And, it just changes your whole routine. And I would say you find a way around everything, whether it's work, whether it's friends. You certainly prioritize things more. Even the dog, right? We'd only had a dog for a year, but, the dog was probably the one that had the hardest time when we had kids. My wife and I adjusted pretty quickly, and the dog couldn't believe, how little attention he got then. So I think you learn to optimize for things that are most important to you. And obviously when we had kids, there were certain choices that you would make if you wanted to spend time with kids. And that may be turning down, an overseas client because I didn't want to be in London all the time. And it wasn't career suicide. It was just letting people know why I was making that decision and where I wanted to be. And, there's a quote that I love that says that what seems small today, the things that seem small today are actually turn out to be the big things later. And I've thought about that so much because I've never regretted hustling home from work, or instead of having a call at 5 o'clock saying it needs to be at 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, right? I'm still going to do the work, but I never regretted having some time in my schedule to make sure I got to get this run in with Chase today. Like, I've never been like, oh, that was a waste, I should have taken that business call. No, I'm still going to do the call. I'm just learned to just be really upfront with people and say, oh, between this time, I'm going to be with my kids, or my kids have a baseball game. And we even had to reschedule about a week ago because I had some calls run over and then I didn't want to miss my kids' game. Yeah. And I was trying to keep those priorities in line of making sure that I do the things that I want to do and I don't let anyone down on a business perspective, at the same time that I won't look back as my kids get older and say, I wish I would have done this with them. I wish I would have done that. You can't say yes to everything. And that's a hard thing with my kids because I'm with them so much. When I say no, it is tough for them. Yeah. But that shift in mindset was pretty quick when I had kids. I wanted to be a dad so bad. And I respect my father so much and the time he spent with me. I only wanted to honor it. I know a lot of people in my situation would be like, oh, well, did you have a neglected childhood with how much time you spent with your kids and you're trying to make up for it? I was like, no. If anything, I just want to make my dad proud that I can be as good of a dad as he was, because we have such a great relationship and he did all those sacrifices for me. I want to make sure that I prioritize my kids the same way that he did my sister and I.
Yeah, most definitely. How far apart are your sister and you?
We're 3 years. She's 3 years older. So.
Okay, so a similar dynamic between your sons, I guess.
For sure, yeah.
How long did you live? I assume you live in Atlanta now, or?
I do, yeah. I've lived in Atlanta since 2012, so 7 years now.
Okay, how do you like the difference between raising kids in the city and raising kids in, it's still a city, but it's not Manhattan?
Yeah, I would say no one would believe this unless they've lived it. The first 4 years of your kid's life, there's probably a few better places better than Manhattan. Yeah. Because playgrounds, play dates, if it rains, there's all the indoor gyms, and instead of dealing with car seats and traffic and all that type of stuff, you just put them in a stroller and walk. Yeah. And that for your social life, it's actually easier because you can still go meet friends. And I'm not a big drinker, but if you want to have a couple of drinks, you're just walking home, right? From all that perspective, it's easier. And then as your kids get older, and now that they're playing flag football, little league, and all these types of things, the city would be a complete pain in the ass. So, we left the city when my kids were 2 and the other one was 3. My youngest was 3 months. So we lived in the city for 2 years, and in the first couple of years in Atlanta were hard because while I had friends here and while I was building a network here, getting together was really tough. People be like, oh, traffic, or, you know, I got to get home from work, or I got to go pick up my dog, or I have to do this. And in Manhattan, it was just so easy to get together. Now it's starting to shift, you know, and I'm starting to appreciate the fact that we live in a place where you have a lot of green spaces. We can go out and ride our bikes. We can go out and run. We don't have to find an alleyway to throw the football. We have a backyard to do those things. So I really appreciate it. You know, I don't regret leaving the city. It was certainly the right choice. It's hard to raise kids there, but those first couple of years, it's a wonderful place to have kids.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah. And what was that context like? What was Birmingham like when you were growing up there? Is that a very urban, or were you in kind of a suburb type area?
No, I was in the suburb, you know, I mean, you know, new construction development, every house almost looked the same, you know.
Yeah.
We were in an area where there's a lot of new construction. So as a kid, you know, I was able to ride my bike on all these dirt roads everywhere and old trails. And, you know, each time would lament as they open up a new part, they tear down woods to build new lots. That was part of my, you know, play area that was gone. But, you know, I built forts in my backyard. We dug really deep holes. I don't know why you dig holes.
Trying to get to China.
Yeah, you know, and, you know, I played Little League. I played basketball. I ran. You know, I had a great childhood. They're always active, always had friends and play dates. And it's the same thing for my kids. They're constantly active. We're kind of the house that everyone comes over to. And I wouldn't want it any other way. Although I don't like cleaning up after the other kids, because my kids are really well behaved. And you come to find out that, you know, when other people come to your house, they don't treat it like it's their own, where my kids are much more respectful when they go to other people's houses. And that's the OCD in me that comes out. So I'm trying to learn how to relax a little bit around that. But I love the fact that when the other kids come over, it's, you know, I'm all-time quarterback in a 2-on-2 game, or I'm all-time offense in basketball. You know, I want to be involved even when they have friends over mixing it up.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know my wife wants us to be the house that all the kids come to, and I would love that also.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you get to coach your kids in any sports?
You know, I did. So I coached flag football. I coached them their first couple of years in T-ball. And then I realized that there's just others that are better at it. You know, I couldn't be more supportive, but it's taken so seriously here in the South. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, when your basketball coach, you know, was, you know, a starting forward in college, when your baseball coach played college baseball or minor league baseball, like, they know drills, they know how to coach kids better. Mm-hmm. And so now that my kids are getting to that age of 9 and 10, I've kind of turned it over to the professionals. So I'm still happy to catch and still be there and still try to go to the practices as much as I can. But I realized with my kids, you know, I spend my time in the backyard. We do a lot of stuff together. We try to take a lot of little mini trips together and do mini triathlons and a lot of that stuff, but that there are others better suited to coach, and I kind of let them do that now.
Yeah. So piece of advice to anyone thinking about coaching their kids. First one is defer to the experts, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure.
So you have any other experiences or advice to anyone who's thinking about coaching their own kids?
Your kids, no matter how well behaved they are going to talk back and frustrate the hell out of you when you coach them. So, you know, I think my kids are probably two of the best behaved kids I've ever been around, and I'm really proud of them. But in coaching them, there was a certain level of disrespect that would come out in coaching that I'd never seen before. And I was just like, wow, this is at like 5 or 6 years old. I don't know if I can handle this getting older. So that was time for me to bow out when that happened.
Yeah. So actually that's a reasonable segue into asking you about like keeping your kids in line. Like, I think we want to give them a lot of space to run, but at some point we got to create some parameters to, you know, discipline them. Do you have any particular way that you go about disciplining your kids that works, doesn't work?
I don't know that I'm doing it right. That's the first thing. You know, I think no matter who I talk to, you find the challenges of, first of all, each kid is different and they respond to different things. My oldest, you know, is always striving to please us, where I think my youngest is always striving to drive me to insanity. And then there's something that I love about that, because that's almost my personality. He's really hard-headed, and he has a no-quit attitude about anything. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's going to serve him really well later on. I think as it comes to discipline, it's tough because the youngest at this point sees the oldest not get disciplined as much. And they're just different kids. I mean, Chase, you know, his nickname was the golden child. Like, he just, it's not that he can't do wrong. It's just that his disposition is one where he just doesn't challenge that much. And I like that Dylan, my youngest, challenges a lot, but he challenges us so much, you got to kind of put him in line. And that's a daily struggle because I don't want to constantly be picking on him. But I think the thing I say the most is, would you talk to your teacher that way? And he'll say no. And I say, would you talk to your coach that way? And he says no. And I was like, well, why are you talking to me that way? You know, and then he rolls his eyes and you're just like, oh my God. Like, you know, like, he's like, why are you asking me these questions? Like, obviously I talk to you this way because I can, you know? And there's been a lot of funny exchanges like that in the moment sometimes aren't so funny. So I would say that's a challenge for me is understanding that sometimes I need to be a little more patient with my younger guy because he's just wired differently. And he notices that his older brother is not getting in trouble for things. And it's because he's not doing anything to get in trouble about. But he still internalizes that probably as, well, I'm always the one who's in trouble. And that's tough. It's tough to find that balance. It's
unbelievable how smart these kids are, yet their capacity to disregard logic astounds me.
That's right. That's right.
Well, so how would you say that the way you were raised impacts the way that you're raising your kids?
Yeah, you know, I think my parents were really, and I know they were really inclusive. Humor was a big part of our family and still is. I mean, unfortunately, I just lost my grandmother at 89 years old last week, and she lived a wonderful life and have nothing but fond memories of her. And the family getting together through a hard time still had a lot of laughter and humor, right? And so from an early age, it's been, the way I was parented was you have to have thick skin. You know, my mom's a nurturing, loving, caring one that's almost sweet to a fault. And my dad's a compassionate guy, but my dad was a college wrestler. You know, he's tough. And some of the toughness wasn't physical. It was, you know, I remember being in high school and going to go on a date and him being like, you're going to take a girl out wearing that, you know? and, you know, you didn't know if he was joking or if he was being serious, right? And it was always that way. And it still is. It's just constant banter and sarcasm and humor. And both my kids have that. And I think it's one where when kids make fun of them or kids pick on them, they're tougher. They don't let everything just get to them because they're used to kind of being made fun of, whether at home, you know, it's me talking about girls at school that like them. And I mention their names all the time. I'm just constantly picking on my kids, just like I joke with my buddies. Yeah. And I think having them be inclusive when I have friends over. You know, I do have a few dinners. I wouldn't call them networking dinners, but there's 7 or 8 guys where we get together on a monthly basis. And, you know, I let my boys kind of hang out for 45 minutes or an hour because I want them to know my friends. They're really good people. They make me a better person, you know. And there's 2 groups, but one of the groups, you know, 8 of us all ran the 100-miler together. So they got to know them really well. And I want them to experience my friends. And so I think it's important to expose them to a lot of things. And the other thing is I traveled a lot as a kid, even growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, we traveled a lot. And I think that gives you exposure outside of the mentalities that maybe the South has or other areas that aren't as favorable. A, they're not all true, but B, where they are true, when you go outside and see people of other, you know, races, cultures, religions, and you experience that, you grow up with a much more worldly view. Yeah. And so our kids from an early age have been fantastic travelers because it was just part of their normal life. And that's something that I learned a lot from my parents was just, you know, there was no reason for us to cry or complain about travel. We were going to go to someplace good or bad, we were going somewhere. And, you know, I was along for the ride and my sister and I were, and now that's the same way with my kids. You know, they're very easy to go to other places and get out of a routine because it's been ingrained in them from an early age. Right. Yeah. And we've been able to be very casual about that and not make such a big deal about bedtimes or meal times or those types of things because we wanted our kids to be a little bit more flexible and not as rigid in schedule. So everybody parents differently. I have friends that, you know, they won't go to California because it would throw off their kids' sleep. You know, yeah, sure. We'll go for 2 nights and realize that they're going to be a wreck. Right. We're going to have a blast during the day and we know we're going to forego some sleep because of that. But, you know, my in-laws live in Southern California. And if it's a big birthday or if it's something, we're not going to miss it because, you know, our sleep schedules are going to get thrown off. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm sure anybody that's got kids and friends with kids can relate to exactly that difference in style. Sure. I want to be sensitive to your time. So I want to knock out some sure. Short answers here. What impact has having kids had on you? It's not a short answer, but no, it's not. You know, it's made me think a lot more about kind of my daily actions. I met a woman not that long ago that asked me a question. She said, "Do you like how you spent your minutes today?" And I
Interesting.
wouldn't say that I cared how much I spent my minutes until I had kids.
Mhm.
I was always mindful of my time. I've never wanted to like binge watch Netflix or watch a bunch of TV. I've always been an active, productive person. But I think as it relates to organizing my day so I could read to my kids at bedtime or making sure I was at all their events. So it certainly changed my mindset about how I spend my minutes. It made me think a little bit more about the time I spend with my parents. They don't live that far away, but kind of seeing the joy that my parents get from spending time with my kids, it just made me very grateful that my parents are, still young and healthy and able to have their grandkids. So I've always been a sentimental person, but even having kids has made me just be even more grateful for the relationship that I have with my kids. And it's really helped, I think, crystallize too some of my friendships. My friends that care about my kids, I've just become closer with. And they know that they're a big part of my life, and they respect the fact of how much time my wife and I want to spend with our kids. We still have our own trips that we take. We're not the parents that can't take time away from their kids. You have to find that balance, but it just helps put a lot more in perspective, I think, too.
Yeah. So what's on your not to-do list as a father?
Ever embarrass my kids, or belittle them. I don't think there's anything to be gained from that. To force them down a certain path. I think one of the things that I respect most about my dad is that as I was getting recruited from college programs as a sophomore in high school, he still supported me to go and sit at the bench and play baseball. And I made the decision on my own. And I think you have to let your kids make certain decisions. So a big thing on my not to-do list is set out a path for my kids or set certain expectations on them. Everyone has their view on, maybe it's religion that they want their kids to be involved in as part of a family. Maybe it's a career path. Maybe it's a school they want them to go to. The only thing that I would not let them do is go to Alabama because I was Auburn. And I've made that pretty clear. And other than that, and I'm serious about that too. If they want to go, they can pay for it. But, in the not to-do list is telling them what's right. I mean, my 9-year-old would be an unbelievably gifted golfer or tennis player. Mm-hmm. His hand-eye coordination is off the charts, but he likes flag football. And candidly, between us, I hope he doesn't hear us, but he's not that fast. He's not that agile. But if that's what he wants to play, we let him play it in the spring. We let him play it in the fall. He takes it after school. That's where he's happy. He doesn't need to specialize in something. I don't care about that. There's always a time in life if you want to specialize or do something. And I'm not going to force my kids down a path because I know what they're good at. I want them to follow what makes them happy and then find out the right way to support that through them getting to make their own choices and then us finding the right level of support. Because I think you have to have your kids get some buy-in themselves too. They have to be willing to practice on their own. They may have to be willing to take some of their allowance. They may have to be willing to give up some things with their friends to show they have some skin in the game as they get older. And those are things that I had to do when I was a kid.
That's really profound. I'm going to directly apply that. Absolutely. That was great. So with exception to not going to Alabama, what would the greatest hope be for your kids?
I'd want them to want to be his dad. I'm getting emotional as much as I am. It's the happiest thing that's ever happened to me other than marrying my wife. And I'd want them to look back on their childhood and say, man, if I could recreate this relationship with my kids, that would be great. I think, you have certain career expectations. I would never want my kids to go to private school, go to an Ivy League college, and then feel some obligation because we've spent $750,000 in education or whatever it would be, that they need to pursue some job to make us happy. It's unfortunate that most people don't get to do what they love. And I think sometimes that stems from societal demands. Other times it can stem from the parents starting putting a certain expectation. And so long as my kids are able to support themselves and their family, I would want them to pursue what makes them happy and what they feel like their calling is. And so, that would give me a lot of fulfillment. And quite frankly, if they still want me in their life, I think that would be a big thing that they don't want too long to go before my wife and I get to see them and hopefully our grandkids. That would be winning for me.
I think that's wonderful. Actually, I'm going to sidetrack here.
Yeah.
You have to grow old, but you don't have to grow up. I pulled that straight off your Instagram post. So what's that mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, it just means that I still want to play in the kids' games, right? It's part of my play and happiness is from being in the backyard, playing the flag football game, being the quarterback, or joking around with them, I'm going to have that immature sense of humor. And, you know, when they have their phones, I'm going to send them the same poop emoji back that they're going to send me, because you have to be able to laugh and have fun. And I think my dad is 69, and there's times where I think he acts like he's, you know, 16 or 19 again. Yeah. And as you have a lot of life's challenges weigh on you, the ability to laugh and have fun and play like a kid is truly where I find my happiness. I mean, this morning I was running on a trail, and instead of worried about twisting my ankle, I flipped it to jumping off a route and doing things like I was a kid again. And I think if you're able to do those things and not do anything too risky, right? But, you know, sometimes being a kid's awesome. You know, I can't think of each year my kids are like, oh, I'm like, there's no better age than 7 and 9. And next year I'm gonna say there's no better ages than 8 and 10. Then I'm gonna say there's no better ages than 9 and 11, because I remember where I was at those ages, and I'm able to relive that now. So I kind of see the way my dad approaches things by just always having fun, being optimistic in the situation. And honestly, you know, kind of acting like he's a kid again works pretty well. It doesn't work in every setting, and you have to be mindful of that. But I think when you play with your kids, if you can play like a kid, rather than always be coaching, and there's a time for that, don't get me wrong, but I think if you can just play, that it certainly brings me joy.
Yeah, I love it. I feel you said it better than I can even think it. So if you were writing a book about your life as a parent, could you think of a name of a couple chapters, maybe a chapter that you're in now?
It's a really good question. Chapter I'm in now would be Keep Picking Me, right? So I see as my kids get older, you know, they have play dates, you know, and I want to still be picked to be on their team. Right. I want to still be included. And I see that, you know, at bedtime, my 9-year-old probably doesn't need us to read to him anymore, but he still wants us to say goodnight. And that's a big part, because I see them kind of transitioning to that next phase where they don't need us as much. Yeah. And I don't want to let go of that right now. Like, I like that they're more independent. I like that on a Saturday morning they can make themselves breakfast, but I still want them to pick me to make breakfast, because I like still providing for them. And I know I'm going to have a whole life of that, but I still want to get picked.
You're making my eyes well up a little bit thinking about that. So who's your favorite? I know you said you don't watch a lot of television, but who's your favorite TV dad?
Oh my gosh, I never really thought about that. Well, until recently, it probably would have been Bill Cosby. Unfortunately, not anymore at all with his behavior. But I love, you know, how he was the jokester. Right. He was always fun. He was joking. I think that was, like I said, until recently, that would not be the pick anymore. But that interesting question with TV dad. I mean, I think, I just think of people that have that real kind of light approach to life is certainly what I lean towards.
Awesome. How would you describe the dad you'd like to be remembered as?
You know, supportive, trustworthy. Like, I want my kids to know that I'm someone that they can come to with anything and they're not going to get judged. I just want to maintain a relationship of, you know, if it's bad news, tell me, right? And that there's not always going to be some hammer on the other side of it, right? So, and quite frankly, someone that they want to be around. You know, the relationships that I see that I really admire are the fact that I want to talk to my dad. I want to talk to my mom. It's not an obligation for me to call my parents. And I know that certain people fall into that category. And I think you want to find that balance between someone that they look up to and come to for advice and provide nurture and support and guidance, and at the same time be a friend, right? And it's, so I would want to look back and know that I was someone that checked those boxes for my kids, and that I was someone that they wanted to hang out with still.
Awesome. I have 3 left. The first was given to me by Lewis House, and that was, when do you feel the most loved?
When my oldest holds my hand. It's become something new at night where he just holds onto my hand. He doesn't want to let go. Yeah. And that's about as good as it gets. Yeah. You know, it's that, and it's my 7-year-old doesn't show a lot of emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's when he does show emotion, he's really trying, and it gets me, because I know it's a stretch for him. Mm-hmm. And it's not forced. So when he does it it really feels good, you know. And then every day when I come home from work and the dog knocks the kids out of the way, face, I feel pretty loved too. He's unconditional with that on a daily basis.
That's the best, walking through the door and the whole crew comes.
Yep.
Yeah,
that feels good.
This is one of my favorite questions. It's the Tim Ferriss billboard question. If you could give a piece of advice that has to fit on a billboard for all the dads flying by at 75 miles an hour, like, what would you put up on that billboard?
Oh, wow. It's really good. So
Tim Ferriss's question. I wish it was mine.
Yeah. You're smart enough to ask it. So the piece of advice I would give, they could read on a billboard driving by at 75 miles an hour. When your kids ask you to play, say yes.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I lied.
Because they're going to ask you to do shit, excuse my language, that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, I find myself struggling sometimes saying, instead of playing this game, can we play this game? Because this is what I want to do.
Right.
And I think just saying yes when they ask you to do something always ends up being the right call, even when it gets me in trouble with my wife for it being too late of a bedtime. We're supposed to come inside. We're not supposed to be playing. And, you know, they say, can the game go to overtime? And I say yes. Very few times does that come back to haunt me.
Yeah. I'm with you. I was chastised just yesterday for doing airplane with both my kids when they were supposed to be brushing their teeth.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Ours is normally wrestling. I get them all riled up at bedtime when they're supposed to be brushing teeth or reading a book, and they want to have a 2-on-1 wrestling match. And I say yes. That normally prolongs bedtime by about 15 minutes. So it could be worse for your wife. She could be dealing with 3 people wrestling rather than, you know, airplane, but give it time.
Oh, I love that. So I know I told you 3. I'm going to jam in an extra one. So I got 2 left. I like this question. If you could give a gift, regardless of, you know, anything, just any gift that you could conjure in your mind to give to every dad on the planet, what do you think would be handy for that every dad to have?
It's either the time or the flexibility to get to spend that time with your kids, because you don't know what a moment is going to bring, and you got to kind of be there. And that's tough. I do feel for some dads, and I know that their work schedule doesn't allow them to spend the kind of time that I get with my kids. And I think, you know, like the gift of flexibility, if that's an option, right? I think
it's great.
That's something that I truly value, that I've been able to kind of carve out a career where it may mean, like I said, at night from 8 till 11 or 8 till midnight, that I'm doing the work that I would have been doing between 5 and 8, but I have that flexibility. I don't have to be in an office. There's not some senior partner that's leaning over me or some deal that's got to get done the next day. And when there is that deal, I don't feel as guilty for doing it.
Yeah.
Because I've carved out the other time. But I realize, and I'm very grateful that I'm in a position where I'm able to do those things, and that not everybody has that flexibility. And I would just want that for them, because there's those that have to work 2 and 3 jobs to provide and do other things. And I would want them to kind of get to spend those moments of joy that I get on a daily basis.
Wonderful. You don't get it. You don't get time back.
No, not at all.
So my last question, I'm going to see if I can get the waterworks going on you, Marc. In the event this recording lasts forever and you have an opportunity to pass a message along to your kids, their kids, their kids, their kids, and forever on, like what's a gem that you leave them?
I don't know that I have many gems, but first of all, there's no wrong way to do the right thing. You know, so it's kind of a corny saying, but it's something I think about a lot, in that, you know, you just want to lead a life that you're happy with, and that you can look yourself in the mirror and be proud of who you are. And for me right now, it's, you know, keeping my priorities in order. And, you know, I think that we all have an obligation to make the most of our minutes, and that we're all going to get off track and spend times doing things we probably shouldn't be doing. But my kids were going to listen to this and want to pass it on to their kids. It would be to say, you know, I've made mistakes, and that I regret the fact that in my 20s and early 30s, you know, I wasn't doing some of this endurance sport that I'm doing now, because of the amount of growth and personal satisfaction that I've gotten from it. But I'm doing it now, right? And I'm going to be able to do this for another 25, 30 years. I confidently believe I'll be doing it till my late 60s. And at least I was willing to try. Yeah. Right. And that, you know, I think what we first started talking about when we were talking about 29 on 29, saying yes and figuring it out a little bit later, I just believe in it so much. So many people get caught up in what are other people going to think, or what if I fail? Well, you know what? I mean, I've had a huge career failure with the startup that I created, and I learned more from that than any success that I've had. Yeah. And, you know, I learned more in falling down and being unbelievably dehydrated and cramping like crazy in a 50 miler than I learned about myself cruising across the finish line with both boys' hands between mine at 103 miles. So you don't know where the learnings are going to come from. You don't know where the joy is going to come from. You don't know where the memories are going to come from. But you got to be willing to put yourself in those situations and surround yourself with people that build you up and don't tear you down. There's way too many people who you'll value their opinions, and they don't care about your best interest. They care about making themselves feel good, or trying to prove to you that they're smart, or that they have the better advice. And I think that if you just trust your gut sometimes, and you put yourself in a situation where you don't know what the outcome is going to be, you'll learn the best about yourself, right? And even if you fail, you'll learn what you need to do the next time. And that doesn't mean that you should go into things unprepared. That doesn't mean that, you shouldn't seek advice of experts and do all those things. I truly believe in all that. But sometimes it just means taking on a really big task and finding out what you're made of. And I don't think you can do that enough, right? And the last thing I would say is that following that advice can lead you to be selfish, and that you have to find that balance of, as much as I love doing that 100-miler, the biggest part of last year was seeing my wife do 29 and 29. That meant more to me than doing Leadville, because she got to experience what I wanted other people to have, what I got myself. And as you get older, the last thing to say is, you don't do many things that you would look back on and say you're proud of. Every day my kids are coming home with a piece of artwork, or, a story from a flag football game at school, or something that they're proud of. And that as you get older, it gets a little bit tougher to be proud of what you do or what you did that day or that week or that month. And that I think you need to put things on your calendar that you're going to look back and be proud of. And that may be taking your kids camping and being proud of yourself for carving out that time. That may be running 100 miles. That may be doing 29 or 29. That may be learning a new skill. But you need to put things on your calendar as you get older that will challenge you, and that you'll be able to be proud of yourself for doing them. Because I think that kind of positive momentum will translate to all aspects of your life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's Marc. Thank you so much for being on, man.
Awesome, Tyler. Thanks for having me, man. I love it.